Greetings everybody, Maximus here. Well, it's time to dust off those Boeing hater comments once again, because the FAA has just issued a serious airworthiness directive to Boeing regarding all 747-8 freighters as well as passenger versions. And actually, this one can be blamed on the FAA for a 13-year-old mistake, which we'll get into a little later. The August 2nd directive was triggered by a report of cracks in specific components of the airplanes, which, if left unchecked, could lead to failure and affect the structural integrity of the planes. The FAA's AD is said to address this unsafe condition, which, if not corrected, could lead to a failure of the skin adjacent to the bulkhead at station 2598. The failure could then jeopardize the structural integrity of the airplane. So without further ado, let's take a look at the FAA's Airworthiness Directive issued on August 2nd, 2023. The FAA issued a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, or NPRM for short, to amend 14 CFR Part 39, adding an AD that would apply to all Boeing Company Model 747-8 freighters and 747-8 series airplanes. The NPRM was prompted by a report indicating the presence of cracks in stringers common to the end fittings at stringer locations S42 left and right and S46 left and right on the aft side of the bulkhead at station 2598. The airplane in question had accumulated 5,517 total flight cycles and 32,468 total flight hours at the time the cracks were found. In addition, during foreign object debris or FOD inspections, Boeing found 5 cracks in stringers on the aft side of the bulkhead at station 2598 on 2 airplanes. The FAA has also received reports of similar cracks found on additional 747-8 airplanes. In all cases, the cracks were found in the side walls of the stringers and had grown in longitudinal and transverse directions, but there was no other damage or deformation in the surrounding area. Now pay attention to this next sentence because we're going to circle back to it later. An investigation by Boeing during airplane assembly found that unshimmed, sound familiar, or incorrectly shimmed gaps that were larger than engineering requirements caused excessive and sustained internal tensile stresses and resulted in stress corrosion, cracking in the stringers. In the NPRM, the FAA proposed to require detailed inspections of the stringers both forward and aft of the bulkhead for cracking, and to take action as applicable. The FAA is issuing this AD to address the stress, corrosion, cracking in the stringers. Listen to the FAA speak and then I'll tell you what they're really trying to say. This condition, if not addressed, could lead to a failure of the skin adjacent to the bulkhead at station 2598, which could adversely affect the structural integrity of the airplane. In other words, this condition, if not fixed, could lead to the failure of the skin, or as I call it, the stuff that keeps the people in the plane from ripping apart at 35,000 feet. I guess that's what the FAA means by adversely affecting the structural integrity of the airplane. So that begs the question to the FAA, why suddenly now has this defect become so urgent? Because this isn't the first AD issued by the FAA for the Dash 8 for this same exact problem. As a matter of fact, it's not even the first this year, not even in this decade. Kind of feels like the FAA and Boeing ignored this issue as long as they could until now that it's become apparently disastrous. But like I said, they knew of this problem before the first 747-8 was even delivered. But we'll get to that in a minute. I'm sure you all remember Aloha Airlines Flight 243 back in 1988, when according to FAA speak, the quote, structural integrity of the skin of the Boeing 737 was affected due to cracks in the fuselage when the top of the airplane was ripped off like the top of a Pringles can. Sadly, one flight attendant was lost, but miraculously the rest of the passengers survived. So that's what the FAA really means when they say something affects structural integrity. So as I said at the top, this situation isn't new. It's a problem that the FAA has been sitting on for 13 years. Okay, so let's all climb in the Wayback Machine and take a journey back in time, shall we?
Gentlemen, we're history.
The first stop of our journey lands on May 8th of this year. The FAA proposed an airworthiness directive for the 747-8 stringer problem, which could lead to cracks in the future. Then on April 6th of this year, again the same FAA AD warning of the same problem. Next, in February also of this year, 2023, the FAA is considering an airworthiness directive for, yes, the same stringer crack and shim gap problems on the 747-8 series of jets. Going back even further, on February 13, 2020, guess what the FAA did? The FAA again proposed to adopt an airworthiness directive for, right again, inspections of the 747-8 jets, indicating that the skin lap joints at certain stringers are subject to widespread fatigue damage. So now that we have traveled back in time 3 years, let's jump in the Wayback Machine one last time. And this time let's go all the way back 10 years further to April 2010, while the brand new 747-8 was still in its testing phase. 9 April 2010. Aviation news heavyweights John Ostrower and Dominic Gates were the first to report on this defect way back when the new 747-8 was still in its testing stages. On Friday, April 9, 2010, Boeing publicly announced and informed the FAA that while the plane was still undergoing early flight testing, that it was inspecting all the fuselages of its new 747-8 jumbo jets, because at the time, in 2010, the area of concern centered around the upper part of the 747's fuselage known as the bonnet. The stringers, which run longitudinally along the aircraft, were inspected for the thickness of the flange, which as a result of overmachining can crack, causing damage to the aircraft's primary structure. Also at the time, Boeing had confirmed the quality issue originated with a sub-tier supplier, Vought Industries. Vought builds panels for the majority of the 747-8's fuselage and empennage. While Boeing maintained that all 3 flight test airplanes have been inspected and cleared for flight, 2 program sources suggested back in 2010 during flight tests that while the aircraft remains airworthy, constraints on G-loading could impact the operating envelope of the aircraft until the issue is fully resolved. And believe it or not, that was the end of it. Not another word about the Dash 8 defect issue was mentioned by the FAA or Boeing, and the plane was cleared to fly by 2011, and the planes were approved by the FAA and EASA and delivered to customers, both passengers and freighter versions. But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
What you're looking at is a service bulletin from Boeing marked confidential, but maybe all their service bulletins are super secret and confidential. But this is marked 8 November 2012, not even a full year since the first plane was delivered, but this bulletin reads, this service bulletin gives instructions to inspect for cracks in the splice fitting, support frame, floor support, forward and aft inner cords, and bulkhead upper and lower webs of the body station 2598 bulkhead. The horizontal stabilizer hinge fittings are attached to the station 2598 bulkhead. Cracks in any of these areas of the station 2598 bulkhead that are not found and repaired could extend or get worse with continued use of the airplane and adversely affect the structural integrity of the bulkhead and the horizontal stabilizer support structure. And that is the exact same location where the cracking occurred when the Dash 8 was manufactured. The exact same defect and location that appeared during test flights. And yet the plane was approved. And the exact same location the FAA has been issuing service bulletins about for the past 13 years now. And yes, I can hear all of you saying, wow, Maximus, that's cool information and all. But what does it mean? And frankly, all I can say is I have no freaking idea. I mean, is this or is this not potentially a catastrophic defect? They knew it when they built it, and they built it anyway. They knew it when they tested it, and the FAA and EASA approved it anyway. It kept reoccurring over 13 years, and the planes kept flying anyway. Yet now in 2023, the FAA wants them to start inspecting and repairing these aircraft beginning next month in September. I mean, it makes you think, what else could the FAA have overlooked in 2011 when the Dash 8 started flying? I know it was something. Oh, I remember. In 2011, the Boeing MAX and its MCAS system was coming to life. But the FAA said they've changed since those days. They take airline safety seriously now after the 2 MAX crashes. They do, right? I sure hope so for all our sakes. So what do you think? Be sure to let me know down below. Well, that's going to wrap up this episode, and thank you all so much for stopping by. And on your way out, if you would be so kind as to subscribe, like, share, and ring the bell. And as always, remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.